Just before sunrise, Hannah Brooks pulled back her curtain and froze at the sight of a starving baby elephant trembling in her backyard. No one knew where it had come from, what had happened to its mother, or why its torn ear looked like it had barely escaped something terrible. But what Hannah couldn't have imagined was this. In just a few short days, that fragile little calf would shake an entire town, trigger threats from the shadows, be part of a rescue no one would ever forget, and force her to make the most heartbreaking choice of her life if she truly wanted to save it. Before sunrise, the land behind Hannah Brooks's house lay still beneath a thin silver wash of moonlight. The mesquite trees barely moved, and the shallow water tank at the edge of her garden reflected a broken strip of stars. Out here, on the quiet outskirts of San Angelo, mornings usually arrived slowly, like the world was in no hurry to become loud again. Inside the old ranch house, Hannah slept lightly, one arm thrown across the quilt her father had bought at a county fair years ago. Ever since childhood, she had been the kind of person who woke at unfamiliar sounds. It was a habit sharpened by years of tending injured wildlife, listening for distress before panic had a chance to become fatal. That morning, something pulled her awake before the sun did. At first, it was only a dull impact, low and heavy, as if something large had leaned its full weight against wood or stone. Then came the splash. Not the quick slap of a deer stepping into water, not the clumsy crash of raccoons knocking over feed buckets. This sound was deeper, slower, almost desperate. It seemed to come from the backyard in uneven bursts, followed by a strained, breathy rumble. Hannah lay still for half a second, listening. The sound came again, vibrating faintly through the old frame of the house. Her heart kicked once, hard. She pushed back the covers, crossed the cold floor barefoot, and reached the kitchen window that looked over the garden rows, the back fence, and the squat metal water tank her father had installed years before to catch runoff after storms. For a moment, her sleepy mind refused to make sense of what she was seeing. A gray shape stood beside the tank, too large to be a calf, too strange to be a horse, and moving with a shaky, unnatural effort. Then the shape shifted under the weak light, and the truth slammed into her. It was an elephant. Not full-grown, not even close. A baby. Alone in her backyard. The little calf's front legs trembled as it leaned toward the tank. Its trunk slipped over the rim, searching clumsily for water, then splashed down too deep and jerked back up. It tried again, more frantic this time, sucking at muddy runoff and coughing some of it back. The skin along its sides hung loose over its ribs. Even from the window, Hannah could see it was dangerously thin. She was out the back door before she realized she had never put on shoes. The dawn air bit at her skin, sharp and dry, but the calf barely seemed to notice her approach. That, more than anything, chilled her. A wild animal that Young should have startled, backed away, cried for its mother. Instead, it stood there swaying, exhausted past fear, blinking with eyes that looked too big for the hollowed shape of its face. Up close, the damage was worse. Thorn scratches lined its shoulders and flank. One knee was caked with dried mud, as if it had fallen more than once and struggled back up each time. And on the edge of its right ear, there was a torn slit, raw in one corner, like something sharp had caught it and ripped through. Hannah stopped 2 feet away, stunned by the fragility hidden inside so much size. The calf lifted its trunk, not in warning, but in a weak, uncertain reach toward her. It touched the sleeve of Hannah's sleep shirt, then her wrist, then hovered there, as if testing whether she was real. Its skin felt rough and warm and frighteningly dry. Hannah swallowed, hard. She had seen fawns abandoned after coyotes moved through, fox kits after brush fires, even a young bobcat once. But nothing about this made sense. Elephants did not simply appear behind people's houses in West Texas. They did not wander alone, half dead, into a fenced yard before dawn. And calves this young did not survive long without a mother, not in any landscape, under any sky. Hannah's training told her what her heart was already resisting. If this baby had reached her property alone, then something had gone very, very wrong long before morning. She glanced past the calf toward the eastern fence line and saw the gate hanging slightly crooked. One chain link panel had been bent inward near the ground. Beyond it, in the soft dirt, the tracks were chaos, deep, round impressions, dragged lines, churned mud. Something had pushed through in the dark, something desperate. Farther out, near the service road, she noticed another mark she did not like, the faint ribbed pattern of a heavy tire. The calf gave a low, broken rumble and nearly folded where it stood. Hannah lunged forward without thinking, hands out, though there was no real way to catch an animal that size. Still, it didn't fall all the way. It sagged, steadied, and leaned part of its weight against the metal tank, breathing in shallow pulls. A smear of dirt flaked off its temple. For one awful second, Hannah thought it might die right there beside her. Instead, it turned its head toward her again and let out a sound so soft it barely seemed possible from something built so large. Not a cry, not a trumpet. More like a lost question. The kind of sound that belonged in darkness, somewhere between pain and hope. Hannah felt it go straight through her. She reached up carefully and laid one hand against the calf's cheek, whispering words she wasn't even aware she was saying. From the porch next door, a motion light suddenly clicked on, casting a pale cone across the fence. Old Mrs. Dorsey, who sometimes woke before dawn to feed stray cats, pulled aside her curtain and froze at the sight. Hannah heard the woman gasp through the stillness, but neither of them moved for a moment. There was only the young elephant, the rising light, and the terrible truth settling over the yard. By the time the first thin band of gold touched the horizon, Hannah already knew this was no strange animal sighting she could hand off with a single phone call. The calf was starving, dehydrated, and far too exhausted to last much longer. It stood in her backyard like some impossible message delivered before sunrise, and as it leaned its small, torn ear into her palm, Hannah understood one thing with sudden, devastating clarity. This baby had not just wandered onto her land, it had come there to survive. The baby elephant did not move much after sunrise. It stayed beside the old water tank, legs braced wide, as if standing itself upright took all the strength it had left. Every few seconds, its trunk dipped over the rim again, searching for more water, then slipping clumsily against the metal. Hunger was in its bones, but thirst had become something deeper, almost ancient. Hannah backed away only long enough to grab her phone, a towel, and an old horse blanket from the mudroom. The calf watched her with dull, hollow eyes, but made no effort to run. That unnerved her more than panic would have. Wild babies were supposed to fear people. This one looked like it had already burned through fear sometime in the long dark before reaching her yard. She called the regional wildlife line first, then the county animal response team. then a mobile large animal vet she knew through rescue work. Each call ended the same way. Roads were blocked from storm damage south of town. Crews were stretched thin. A collapsed low-water crossing had rerouted emergency vehicles for miles. Help was coming, they said, but not fast enough to matter to a calf swaying on borrowed time. By the third call, Hannah stopped pacing and looked straight at the elephant again. It had lowered itself awkwardly onto its front knees, then struggled back up, as if the ground had briefly tempted it to stay there. She knew that look in animals. It was not rest. It was surrender, creeping in around the edges. If she kept waiting for the right people, this baby was going to die in her backyard before noon. Mrs. Dorsey from next door had come out onto her porch in a robe and slippers, one hand still clutching the curtain tie she must have brought with her by accident. She called across the fence in a shaky voice, asking if it was real. Hannah answered without looking away from the calf. "Yeah," she said softly, "and I don't think it has much time." Even the older woman fell quiet after that. The calf gave a dry, breathy rumble and reached its trunk toward the metal again. But this time, it missed the water completely and struck the side of the tank with a dull, hollow clang. The sound made Hannah flinch. She crouched near the garden hose spigot and turned on a slow stream, letting clean water pool first in a shallow feed pan. The calf noticed the sound instantly, trunk lifting, ears barely twitching. It stepped toward the pan in a broken, uncertain way, one front foot dragging for half a second before it found balance. Then it lowered its trunk and sucked greedily. Water splashed across its mouth and chin. Some of it went in, some dribbled out. It coughed, regrouped, then tried again with the fierce concentration of a creature too young to understand anything except the need to keep living one swallow at a time. Hannah moved carefully now, working from instinct and memory. She mixed an emergency electrolyte solution in a plastic bucket, added warm water, and looked around for anything that might help her offer it slowly. A lamb bottle from an old rehab kit sat in a cabinet above the sink, dusty but intact. When she brought it outside, the calf stared at it, trunk hovering, uncertain what kind of strange little object had entered its world. The first attempt failed. The calf nudged the bottle aside, turned its head, and gave a weak protest that sounded almost embarrassed. Hannah stayed low and patient, speaking in the same calm voice she used with injured foals and orphaned deer. The second time, she touched a little of the mixture to the calf's mouth. Something changed. Instinct recognized what fear did not. Its mouth found the nipple, and suddenly, it began to drink. It was not graceful. It was desperate. The calf pulled so hard that liquid spilled over Hannah's hands and down her wrists. Its trunk wrapped around her forearm with surprising urgency, as though anchoring itself to the one steady thing in reach. Hannah felt the strength in that grip and the panic beneath it, and for one sharp moment, her throat closed. This baby was not just thirsty. It was asking not to be left alone again. She kept feeding until the bottle emptied, then waited, counting each breath the way her father had taught her during long nights with sick livestock. The calf's breathing stayed rough, but not as jagged as before. It blinked slowly, trunk still resting against her sleeve. Up close, its torn ear looked even worse in daylight, the edge scraped raw and crusted with dirt. Whatever had happened before dawn, it had not been gentle. Another call came through at last, this time from a tired-sounding coordinator with the State Response Unit. He apologized before he even gave the update. No team could reach her until morning, maybe later if roads worsened again. Hannah looked at the elephant leaning into her shoulder like trust had outrun reason. She thanked him, ended the call, and sat in silence for several seconds, the decision already settling inside her. The calf shifted its weight, let out a softer rumble than before, and laid the tip of its trunk across Hannah's knee. There was something pleading in the gesture, but something peaceful, too, as if the worst edge of terror had finally eased. Hannah brushed a hand along its cheek and thought of every name that didn't fit. Then she whispered the one that did. Mercy. The baby elephant closed its eyes, and for the first time that morning, it stayed standing, without shaking. By late afternoon, Mercy had begun to follow Hannah, with her eyes wherever she moved. The little elephant still looked fragile, still too thin and too tired for a body built to grow enormous. But something had shifted since the first bottle. She no longer stood like a creature waiting to collapse. She stood like one listening for the next small kindness and hoping it would come. Hannah moved slowly through the yard, setting up shade near the back fence with an old canvas tarp and 2 rusted poles from her father's shed. Mercy watched every step. When Hannah disappeared inside for more supplies, the calf let out a low, uneasy rumble that rolled softly through the warm Texas air. It was not loud, but it carried the raw edge of panic. The sound hurried Hannah back outside faster than she wanted to admit. Mrs. Dorsey had sent over a folding lawn chair, a cooler of ice, and 3 stern instructions shouted through the fence about drinking water, sunscreen, and common sense. Hannah appreciated all of it, even the scolding. She had also called someone else without asking first. Just before sunset, an aging pickup rolled onto the dirt shoulder beyond the gate, and Eli Turner climbed out with the slow heaviness of a man who noticed everything. Eli lived a 1/4 mile down the road in a weathered house lined with rusted tools and wind-bent cedar. He had once worked as a state park ranger and later as a county game warden, though most people around San Angelo only knew him as the quiet widower who fixed his own fences and preferred dogs to conversation. He took one look at Mercy and removed his hat without a word, as if stepping into a church. Mercy noticed him too. Her trunk lifted halfway, uncertain, then drifted back toward Hannah instead. That told Eli more than he said out loud. He crouched a few feet away, studying the calf with narrowed eyes, taking in the ribs, the torn ear, the dried mud ground into the folds of her legs. Then his gaze shifted toward the eastern fence and stayed there long enough for Hannah to feel a new kind of unease settling into the evening. He walked the fence line in silence first. Hannah followed a few steps behind, while Mercy trailed after her, slow and unsteady, refusing to let more than 10 feet separate them. Near the far corner, the chain-link panel bent inward where Hannah had noticed it that morning. Up close, Eli found more. One post had fresh scrape marks near the base. The dirt was churned. Mesquite branches were snapped at shoulder height. Then he found the wire. A length of thin, braided cable lay half buried in the weeds beyond the fence, one end frayed and bright where it had torn loose. Eli picked it up, carefully, and turned it in the fading light. It was not ranch fencing, and it was not the kind of hardware any neighbor around here would use for livestock. Hannah looked from the wire to Mercy's injured ear and felt the cold realization spread through her chest before Eli even spoke. "This calf didn't just wander," he said at last. His voice was low, rough, and certain. Something held her, maybe not long enough. He did not say traffickers. He did not say illegal transport. He did not need to. Mercy gave a faint sound behind Hannah, and when she turned, the calf was staring at them with the wide, exhausted eyes of something that had survived more than it understood. The light softened toward gold. Hannah mixed another bottle while Eli circled wider, following disturbed ground out past the fence to the service road. From the porch, she could see him pause, kneel, then stand again with the stiffness of a man whose guess had just become fact. When he came back, he wiped one hand on his jeans and told her there were fresh tire tracks out there, deep enough to belong to a heavy vehicle. He asked if anyone nearby kept exotic animals. Hannah shook her head. Not legally, not openly. West Texas had its share of private money and stranger secrets than most people liked to admit. But elephants were not something you misplaced like escaped goats. Eli stared past her at Mercy, who had finally learned the shape of the bottle and now took it with less fear and more need. "Then somebody's looking for her," he said. The words hung between them just as the first cicadas began to sing. Hannah did not answer right away. She knelt beside Mercy and wiped spilled formula from the calf's mouth with the corner of a clean towel. Mercy leaned into her shoulder with the blind trust of a creature that had chosen its safe place and would not be argued out of it. The tenderness of that small movement made Eli look away for a second. He offered to stay after dark, and Hannah accepted before pride could interfere. Mrs. Dorsey, hearing enough from across the fence to alarm herself thoroughly, switched on the 2 floodlights over her garage and announced she would be watching everything from her kitchen window. It would have been almost funny under other circumstances, but when the sky dimmed and the land began to flatten into shadow, none of it felt exaggerated anymore. Mercy grew restless at dusk. Every time Hannah stepped toward the house, even for a minute, the calf made that broken, lonely rumble and shuffled after her until she reached the tarp again. So Hannah dragged out an old porch cushion and settled beside her in the yard. Mercy lowered herself awkwardly onto the blanket-covered ground with a tired exhale, trunk draped over Hannah's boot, as if contact alone could keep the dark from closing in. For a while, the world went quiet, except for insects, distant highway noise, and Mercy's breathing, steadier now than it had been. That morning, Hannah almost let herself believe the night might pass gently. Then, sometime after full dark, Eli straightened from his chair by the fence and looked toward the road. Far beyond the gate, 2 headlights slowed almost to a stop, idled there for a few seconds, and then moved on without turning in. Mercy lifted her head before any human heard the engine. The truck came back just after dawn, not close enough to raise dust into the yard, not slow enough for Hannah to read the plates, but long enough for everyone watching to feel it. Eli stood near the gate with a mug of black coffee in one hand and his old field binoculars in the other. By the time he raised them, the vehicle had already rolled past the mesquite line and disappeared toward the county road, leaving behind a tension that settled over the property like heat. Mercy felt it too. She had slept in brief, uneasy stretches with her trunk draped across Hannah's ankle, waking whenever coyotes called in the distance or porch lights flicked on nearby. Now she stood beneath the tarp with her ears held slightly out, not in confidence, but in uncertainty, her body angling toward Hannah every few seconds, as if checking the one fact in the world she still trusted. Her appetite returned, but only if Hannah stayed within reach. By mid-morning, Hannah's phone had become its own kind of storm. The short video she had posted the day before, meant only to reach rescue groups faster, had blown far beyond anyone she knew. Local stations had clipped it. Animal accounts had reposted it. The comments came in waves: prayers, disbelief, advice, accusations, conspiracy theories, amateur veterinarians, and strangers asking for the exact location of the house. She hated that part immediately. The baby elephant should have been the story. Instead, people wanted drama, ownership, blame, spectacle. Hannah deleted 3 comments that mentioned private roads near her property and turned off geotagging on every platform she could think of. Mercy nudged her elbow while she stood in the yard with the phone clenched in one hand, and Hannah slid it into her pocket, ashamed of how quickly the outside world had started to feel like a threat. A white SUV arrived before noon, with the seal of the town council on the driver's door. Eli muttered something under his breath that Hannah pretended not to hear. The woman who stepped out looked composed in a way that suggested she stayed composed on purpose. Monica Reed was in her early 40s, neatly dressed despite the dust, with a legal pad tucked under one arm and the polite expression of someone prepared to deliver unwelcome news without losing control of the room. She introduced herself as counsel for the local municipal board and explained, in language that was careful but unmistakable, that the town had already received complaints. Traffic, noise, safety, improper possession of wildlife, liability if anyone got hurt. Hannah listened with both arms folded, her exhaustion sharpening into defensiveness. Mercy stood a few yards behind her under the shade tarp, watching Monica with the still concentration of a child too weak to hide. Monica asked to see the animal up close. It was not a warm request. It was procedural, measured, framed as necessary. Hannah almost refused, but Eli gave the smallest shake of his head from where he leaned against the fence, and she stepped aside. Monica followed her into the yard in careful low heels that sank slightly into the dry ground. The closer she came, the more the professionalism in her face gave way to something less guarded, something human and startled. Mercy had been lying down. The moment Hannah said her name, the calf struggled to her feet with visible effort and made a soft, relieved sound deep in her throat. Then she went straight to Hannah, pressing her forehead against Hannah's side and sliding the tip of her trunk around Hannah's wrist with a familiarity that turned the whole yard quiet. Monica stopped walking. For one long second, even her legal pad lowered. "She does that every time?" she asked. "Only when she's scared," Hannah said. The answer landed harder than she meant it to. Mercy shifted then, turning her attention to Monica. Her trunk lifted, slow and exploratory, and reached toward the folder in the woman's hand. Monica held still. The calf touched the paper, then the edge of Monica's sleeve, then the back of her hand with incredible gentleness, as if meeting another person was not a risk, but a question. Something in Monica's expression cracked before she could hide it. When she stepped back, it was not from fear. It was to breathe. She cleared her throat and asked a few more questions about veterinary support, food, fencing, and state response times. But the force had drained out of her delivery. Hannah noticed her gaze drift more than once toward Mercy's torn ear and sharp ribs. She also noticed that Monica no longer used phrases like "the animal" quite as often. By the time she turned toward the gate, she was saying, "The calf." The reprieve did not last. That afternoon, Hannah started receiving direct messages from an account with no profile photo and no followers. The first sounded oddly formal, asking whether the elephant had visible ear damage. The next asked whether she was being kept indoors at night. Then came one that made Hannah's stomach drop. "You need to cooperate before people make mistakes." She showed the messages to Eli, who read them once and looked immediately toward the road. He checked the fence line again before sunset. This time, he found fresh boot prints near the east side, half overlapping the tracks from the night before. Nothing had crossed into the yard, but someone had come close enough to study it. Hannah did not tell Mrs. Dorsey that part. The older woman was already furious enough on principle and had begun taking photos of every unfamiliar vehicle from behind her lace curtains like a one-woman neighborhood surveillance network. Mercy seemed extra sensitive to every change in the air. A car door slamming down the road made her flinch. A barking dog sent her shuffling straight toward Hannah. When evening cooled the yard and the shadows lengthened again, she refused to settle unless Hannah sat beside her. The bottle came easier now. The swallowing was stronger. But the moment Hannah stood to carry the empty supplies back inside, Mercy gave a low, cracked cry that pulled her right back. After dark, Eli hung a second lantern by the eastern fence and stayed in his chair with a flashlight across his lap. Monica called unexpectedly just before 9. Her voice was quieter than before, stripped of official distance. She said she had delayed filing any emergency removal notice for 24 hours and advised Hannah, very carefully, to contact the sheriff directly if another message came in. Then she paused and added, almost reluctantly, "Someone may be more interested in that calf than the public should be." When the call ended, Hannah sat on the blanket beside Mercy and listened to the insects hum in the dark. The calf edged closer until her shoulder pressed against Hannah's knee. For a while, that small weight was enough to soften the panic. Then Hannah's phone lit up again with one final message from the nameless account. "That animal does not belong to you. We're coming soon." The message arrived at 9:17 p.m., and after that, the night changed shape. Until then, fear had still been something Hannah could organize. Calls made, gates checked, lanterns lit, Eli posted by the fence with a flashlight and an old folding chair that groaned every time he shifted. But those 8 words on the screen made the danger feel personal, not abstract, not theoretical. Somebody out there knew Mercy was here, and worse, somebody believed they had a claim. Hannah read the message 3 times before her thumb finally moved. She forwarded screenshots to the sheriff's office, then to Monica, then to herself, because panic made people stupid, and she did not want to lose the evidence if her phone froze. Mercy stood beside her under the tarp, watching every motion with exhausted concentration, as if human fear had its own scent, and she had already learned to recognize it. Eli came over without asking and took the phone from her hand just long enough to read. His jaw tightened, but his voice stayed level. He said the same thing he would have said about a wounded deer cornered near a road or a poacher cutting across protected land. Once desperate people think they are close to getting what they want, they do not become more careful. They become impatient. That, he warned her, was usually when they made mistakes. Mercy shifted at the sound of his voice and brushed her trunk against Hannah's shoulder, then against the side of the blanket, looking for the familiar reassurance of touch. Hannah laid a hand along the calf's cheek and felt the rough warmth of skin still too dry, still carrying the memory of exposure and fear. It struck her suddenly that Mercy had likely already survived one terrifying night before finding this yard. She did not deserve another. The sheriff sent a deputy, but only one, and only for a short pass through the property. He was young, polite, and clearly out of his depth. He checked the road, looked at the damaged fence, took the screenshots, and promised extra patrols if a unit freed up. Then he glanced toward the enormous baby under the tarp and admitted, almost apologetically, that there was no protocol in his training for threats involving an elephant in a residential county zone. That left Hannah with reality instead of reassurance. By 10 o'clock, Eli had helped her move old livestock panels from the side shed and build a second inner enclosure closer to the house, tighter and easier to watch from the porch. It was ugly, improvised, and far too small for what Mercy would one day become. But for one night, it might keep strangers from reaching her quickly. Hannah hated the idea the moment the shape of it became visible in the lantern light. Mercy hated it more. The first time they tried guiding her inside, the calf balked. Not with anger, not with force, with fear. She stopped at the narrow opening and planted her feet, ears twitching, trunk searching frantically through the air until it found Hannah's shirt and clung there. When Hannah stepped into the enclosure and called softly, Mercy took one uncertain step after her, then another. But the moment Eli swung the panel closed behind them, the calf gave a broken, panicked cry that split the night open. Hannah's heart lurched so hard it hurt. Mercy spun awkwardly in the limited space, bumping the rails, lifting her trunk high and then low, looking for escape, for her mother, for some vanished version of the world where confinement had not already taught her terror. The sound she made was nothing like the small rumbling questions of earlier. This was grief, with edges on it. Hannah dropped the feed bucket and went straight to her, pressing both hands against her shoulder and neck, speaking until her own voice shook. "It's okay. I'm here. I'm right here." But safety did not feel like safety to a baby that had once been trapped. Mercy refused the next bottle entirely. She turned her head away, then back again, then away once more, trembling so hard the nipple rattled against her mouth. Hannah tried kneeling, tried humming, tried resting her forehead against Mercy's jaw the way the calf seemed to like. Nothing worked for several terrible minutes. Eli stood outside the panel, silent, his weathered face drawn tighter with every failed attempt, because even he knew there were some battles you could not win with force. Then Hannah made a choice that was not practical, only true. She dragged an old porch cushion into the enclosure and sat down in the dirt beside Mercy, not facing her, not crowding her, just staying there long enough for panic to tire itself out. The lantern cast a weak gold circle around them. Beyond it, the yard disappeared into dark. Mercy's breathing came fast at first, then slower, then hitched once more before easing. At last, the calf lowered her trunk into Hannah's lap like a question she was too tired to ask aloud. When Hannah offered the bottle again, Mercy drank. Not eagerly this time, cautiously. In small pulls, pausing every few seconds as if checking that Hannah had not vanished while she looked away. Milk formula dribbled down her chin and onto Hannah's jeans. Hannah did not move except to steady the bottle and smooth the torn edge of Mercy's ear with the gentlest possible fingers. Outside the pen, the night insects sang on, indifferent, and endless, as if the whole world had not narrowed to one frightened baby relearning trust. Close to midnight, Eli found something near the east fence and brought it back under the lantern without a word. It was a black knit glove, damp with dew, caught on the lower wire, where no one living on this road had any reason to be. Not ranch gear, not work gloves. Something lighter, city-bought, anonymous. Hannah stared at it while Mercy leaned against her shoulder, and for the first time, the threat stopped feeling like messages on a screen and became a person standing in the dark. Mrs. Dorsey, who had refused to go to bed on principle, called from her kitchen window that she'd seen a flashlight near the road 20 minutes earlier. Eli swore under his breath and took his own light out there again, moving more carefully now. Hannah stayed where she was. She could not leave Mercy, and Mercy would not have let her if she tried. The calf had started to settle, one foreleg folded awkwardly beneath her, trunk still wound loosely around Hannah's wrist. The strange thing was how small Mercy seemed once she finally rested. Not physically. Even exhausted, she was heavier than anything Hannah had ever held close. But sleep stripped something off her, some brave little effort she'd been making all day to keep standing, keep drinking, keep finding Hannah whenever fear rose up. In sleep, she looked younger, less like a miracle, and more like what she truly was, a baby who should have been tucked safely against her mother somewhere under an open sky. A little after 1 in the morning, Monica called again. Her voice was low, as if she did not want to wake her own conscience too quickly. She said she had used a private contact to trace the account that sent the threats, and while the trail was muddy, it pointed to a prepaid phone activated 2 counties over near a closed livestock auction route. Not proof, not enough for a warrant, but enough to confirm what Eli already believed. Somebody connected to movement, transport, or sale knew Mercy was alive. When the call ended, Hannah did not feel calmer, but she did feel clearer. This was no longer just about nursing a half-starved calf through dehydration and shock. It was about keeping her alive long enough to reach the people who could protect her properly. Mercy shifted in her sleep, gave one soft rumble, and tightened her trunk around Hannah's hand. Hannah sat there in the dirt pen until her legs went numb, listening to the slow rhythm of that breathing, and understood with painful certainty that love had already changed shape. Now it was not just care. Now it was defense. By the next morning, the yard felt less like a home and more like a checkpoint. Eli had run fresh wire along the east fence before sunrise. Mrs. Dorsey had a notebook on her kitchen counter with times, license plate fragments, and descriptions of every truck she didn't like. Hannah had slept maybe 40 minutes total, curled on the cushion beside Mercy, waking each time the calf stirred or sighed. But Mercy looked stronger. Not healthy. Not yet. Still too lean. Still carrying those sharp little shadows along her ribs. Still with the torn ear and the wary pauses before every new sound. Yet there was more steadiness in her legs now. More intent in her eyes. She finished her morning bottle without trembling, and even splashed a little clean water over her own trunk, as if some buried piece of playfulness had finally remembered it existed. Dr. Caroline Hayes had not arrived yet, but one of her field contacts called Hannah before noon and walked her through a longer feeding schedule, hydration checks, and signs of overload in orphaned calves. Hannah wrote everything down on the back of an old seed catalog while Mercy stood close enough to breathe against her shoulder. The calf had developed a new habit overnight. Whenever Hannah stopped talking, Mercy touched her gently, as if asking her to keep the world understandable. The trouble was, the world had become louder. Even with the sheriff doing extra passes, word had spread too far. Cars slowed along the road. People parked where they shouldn't. Two women with phones tried to lean over the fence for a better angle, until Eli sent them away with one look and a voice that sounded like weathered oak splitting. Hannah hated that Mercy kept seeing strangers before she had fully learned that not every human hand meant harm. By mid-afternoon, Monica Reed returned, this time without the legal pad. She brought printed copies of temporary municipal language that might help delay any forced removal order until federal wildlife officers could take jurisdiction. It was not generosity exactly. It was something quieter and harder earned. She stood near the gate, watching Mercy nose a feed bucket, and for the first time, she admitted she'd spent half the night reading about orphan elephant behavior and stress bonding. "She's attached to you fast," she said. "Faster than I expected." "She thinks I'm safe," Hannah answered. Monica looked at the torn ear, then at the fresh reinforcement along the fence. "Then let's make sure that stays true." Late in the afternoon, a local church volunteer named Rosa came by with groceries, bottled water, and a folding table nobody had asked for, but immediately needed. She had 3 grandchildren, a voice like warm gravel, and the practical instinct to start doing useful things without waiting for permission. While Hannah mixed Mercy's next feeding, Rosa set out sandwiches for everyone else and hung an old wind chime by the porch so the back door would make noise if it opened. For almost an hour, the yard felt strangely close to normal. Mercy dozed in the shade, one leg tucked awkwardly beneath her, trunk draped across a folded blanket. Hannah sat beside her, sorting syringes, towels, and formula packets into neat rows, the kind of pointless organization exhausted people use to keep panic from becoming visible. Noah, the 6-year-old boy from 2 houses down, had come with Rosa and had been warned at least 5 times to stay near the porch steps and not go wandering. He promised every single time. Then a pickup backfired out on the county road. The sound cracked through the air like a gunshot. Mercy jolted awake, trunk snapping upward, and Noah, already closer to the side fence than he should have been, startled hard enough to stumble backward. There had been light rain 2 nights earlier, and the drainage ditch beyond the side path still held a strip of slick clay and runoff. The little boy's heel skidded. Before anyone could reach him, he slid down the embankment and disappeared into the shallow, muddy channel below. Rosa screamed first. Hannah was moving before the sound finished. Noah was not deep enough to drown, but he was trapped at a terrible angle. One leg wedged under storm debris, both hands clawing uselessly at wet dirt that kept collapsing under him. Every time he tried to push up, he slid lower. Hannah hit the edge of the ditch and dropped to her knees, reaching down. But the bank gave beneath her weight. One bad pull, and she would end up down there with him. Then Mercy came. The calf did not trumpet. She did not charge wildly. She moved with a sudden, focused urgency Hannah had never seen before. Fast, despite her size, straight toward the sound of panic. Eli shouted something sharp, afraid she might crush the bank or make things worse. But Mercy stopped at the edge, planted her feet wide, and lowered her body against the slope. Wet dirt slid under her weight, but she held. Then her trunk stretched down toward Noah. At first, the boy only cried harder, because fear has no logic when it's 6 years old and covered in mud. Hannah leaned farther down and told him to grab Mercy, not pull, just hold. The calf's trunk touched his shoulder, then his arm, then braced along the ditch wall like a living rail. It was not strength alone that saved him. It was stability. Mercy gave him something the mud had taken away, a point that did not move. Hannah got one hand around Noah's wrist, and Eli got hold of the back of her belt. Together, inch by shaking inch, they pulled the boy up the bank while Mercy held position, slipping once, recovering, and staying there until Noah's body cleared the edge entirely. The second he was safe, Rosa snatched him up, sobbing. Hannah turned back in time to see Mercy still standing guard over the ditch, ears slightly out, breath coming fast, as if waiting to be sure the crying had ended. For a few stunned seconds, nobody spoke. Then Mrs. Dorsey yelled from her porch that the whole thing was on camera. Her son had installed security cameras after a break-in scare last year, and one of them faced the side yard and ditch line perfectly. Within an hour, the footage had been copied, replayed, sent to 3 local stations, and shared online faster than anyone could stop it. By sunset, Mercy was no longer just the mysterious elephant calf in a backyard. She was the baby who had helped save a child. The attention exploded in a different way after that. There were still doubters, still gawkers, still people who wanted spectacle more than truth. But now, there were also messages from pediatric nurses, ranch families, retired teachers, and grandparents saying the same thing in different words. That little elephant knew exactly what she was doing. Hannah watched the replay once and only once. What broke her was not the rescue itself. It was the instant after, when Mercy turned from the ditch and looked for Hannah first. That evening, a black SUV with federal plates turned into the drive just as the sky began to soften pink over the mesquite. Eli saw it and straightened. Monica, who had stayed longer than she planned, let out a breath she had probably been holding since lunch. A woman in field boots stepped out, introduced herself as Dr. Carolyn Hayes, and asked one question before anything else. "Where's the calf who saved the boy?" Dr. Carolyn Hayes did not waste time pretending the situation was ordinary. She examined Mercy, where the calf stood beside the tarp, one hand resting against Hannah's hip, as if even now she needed to make sure her safe person had not been replaced. Caroline moved with the calm precision of someone who had spent years around animals large enough to injure people by accident and gentle enough to break hearts on purpose. Mercy allowed the exam, but only barely. She tolerated the stethoscope, the flashlight, the careful touch along her torn ear and underfed ribs, because Hannah stayed close enough for her trunk to keep finding the hem of Hannah's shirt. When Caroline asked Hannah to step back 2 feet so she could watch Mercy's balance and response on her own, the calf's whole body changed. Her breathing sped up. Her eyes sharpened with fear. She took 2 quick steps after Hannah immediately. Caroline noticed everything. By the time the quick assessment was done, the sun had dropped low and painted the yard in soft bronze. Mercy had mild dehydration still, stress-bonding behavior, healing superficial injuries, and a level of emotional dependence that worried Caroline more than the physical damage. Orphan elephant calves could attach hard and fast when terrified. That attachment could save them in the beginning. It could also become a problem later if nobody taught them how to return to their own kind. Hannah knew that, before Caroline said it out loud. Still, hearing it hurt. "There's a federal rehabilitation site in New Mexico," Carolyn said quietly near the porch, while Mercy stood only a few feet away, stripping leaves from a branch Eli had cut for her. "Protected land, proper nutrition, isolation protocols, other orphan calves. If she stays alive, and I think she will, she needs more than emergency care. She needs a future that doesn't end in somebody's backyard." The words were kind. The truth inside them was not. Hannah looked toward Mercy and felt the old resistance rise immediately, irrational and fierce. In just a few days, the calf had gone from impossible stranger to living responsibility, from something she found at dawn to something whose breathing she measured in the dark. Mercy was no longer merely in the yard. She had altered the emotional shape of the place. Every fence, every bucket, every patch of shade now seemed arranged around her. Caroline, to her credit, did not push too hard. Instead, she laid out what came next with the blunt mercy of experience. Federal transport could be arranged fast because of the threats, the online attention, and now the rescue of Noah. But there was a complication. Mercy was too attached to Hannah already to be handed over cold to a new team and expected to cope. If the transfer was going to work, Hannah would need to go too, at least temporarily, as Mercy's continuity handler through the first stage of intake. That was the offer. Not ownership, not adoption. Not some fantasy ending where love canceled biology and law. A role, a necessary one. Hannah could help Mercy survive the handoff, teach the rehab team what calmed her, what frightened her, what signals she responded to, how she liked the bottle angled, where she tolerated touch when she was scared. Then, slowly and painfully, Hannah would have to help her need that less. Eli said yes before Hannah did, not for himself, for the calf. He stood with his hands hooked over the top rail of the pen, looking older than usual in the fading light. "If bad people were moving her, they may try again," he said. "And even if they don't, she can't stay here. You know that." There was no cruelty in it, only the sort of honesty people reserve for moments when pretending would do more damage than truth. Monica, standing near the gate, nodded once and added that she could clear the legal side tonight. Mercy had no idea any of this was being decided. She was busy nudging at a feed tub with growing confidence, stronger now than she had been that first morning by the water tank. Every now and then she turned and looked toward Hannah, checking, always checking, and each time Hannah looked back automatically. That small ritual made the conversation around her feel almost unbearable. Mercy's trust was so complete, it barely had room for imagination. She could not know that love was already preparing to ask something difficult of both of them. The first real sign came later, after dark, when Carolyn asked to run a simple test. One of the rehab assistants who had driven in with her, a young handler named Mateo, prepared the evening bottle while Hannah stayed out of view on the porch. The idea was not to deprive Mercy, only to see how much of her feeding response now belonged to hunger and how much belonged to Hannah. For a few seconds, Mercy sniffed the bottle and seemed willing. Then she froze. Her trunk lifted. Her eyes searched past Mateo, over his shoulder, into the dark. And then she cried. It was not loud in the way people imagine elephants to be. It was smaller than that, more wounded, a sound pulled up from somewhere too young and too scared to understand separation as a process. Mercy turned away from the bottle entirely and began pacing the short width of the enclosure, searching for Hannah with frantic, rising urgency. By the time Hannah stepped back into view, the calf was shaking again, not from weakness this time, but from distress. She went straight to Hannah like gravity. Caroline did not stop her. She only watched, one hand pressed briefly to her own mouth, as Mercy wrapped her trunk around Hannah's waist and pressed her head into Hannah's chest with absolute, desperate relief. "That," Caroline said softly after a moment, "is exactly why you need to come, and exactly why she can't stay dependent forever." No one argued with her after that. The truth was standing there in plain sight. The next 2 days became a blur of preparation. Monica handled emergency papers and special transit authorization with a level of determination that surprised even herself. Eli reinforced the loading path from the side gate and used old cattle panels to create a calmer funnel toward where the transport unit would back in. Rosa returned with coolers of food, extra towels, and enough practical encouragement to keep everybody upright. Even Mrs. Dorsey contributed by documenting every suspicious vehicle until the road itself seemed tired of being watched. In the middle of all that, Hannah began doing something quieter. She started teaching Mercy a transition language. Not tricks, not performance. Tiny, repeatable signals. A soft double tap along the side of the trunk before feeding. A low 3-note hum when it was time to settle. The brush of 2 fingers beneath the torn ear followed by stillness. Caroline encouraged it, explaining that consistency could become a bridge when the bigger changes began. Mercy responded fast, as though some deep part of her wanted structure as badly as she wanted closeness. The bond, if anything, became even more visible once departure had a date. Mercy followed Hannah from shade to fence to porch with a devotion that was almost painful to witness. If Hannah knelt, Mercy leaned against her. If Hannah sorted supplies, Mercy nosed the boxes. If Hannah disappeared indoors too long, the calf stood outside the screen door and touched it softly with the tip of her trunk, one quiet tap at a time, until Hannah came back. Everyone could see it now. Not cute dependence. Survival rewritten as attachment. The transport was scheduled for Friday morning. On Thursday night, the sky went clear and huge over the property, stars thrown wide across the Texas dark. Hannah sat beside Mercy in the enclosure, after everyone else had gone to their cars or spare rooms or kitchen windows. The calf had finished her last bottle and now rested with her front legs folded, trunk curled across Hannah's boot, exactly the way she had the night of the threats, except everything was different now. Mercy was stronger, safer, headed toward a life she deserved, and that made it harder, not easier. Hannah pressed her hand against the warm slope of Mercy's face and listened to the slow evening sounds all around them. Beyond the fence, this would be her last full night with the calf in the yard where they had found each other. Tomorrow, she would do the wildest thing anyone around here expected of her. Not keep Mercy, not hide her, not fight the world for the right to stay exactly as they were. She would climb into a federal transport trailer and go with her toward the first real goodbye. Friday came in the pale gray hour before sunrise, the kind of morning that made every object in the yard look briefly uncertain, as if the world itself had not decided what it was about to become. The transport trailer backed slowly through the side gate under Eli's direction, its white panels catching the porch light in flat, quiet flashes. Mercy stood beside Hannah, awake early, already sensing change before any human voice explained it. The trailer was not cruel. That almost made it worse. It had padded walls, reinforced flooring, ventilation slats, and the clean smell of disinfectant layered over metal and dust. Caroline had insisted on the best equipment available, and Mateo had spent the previous evening laying out the loading path with feed tubs, damp hay, and the familiar blankets Mercy had come to know. Still, to a baby who had once broken out of confinement bleeding and terrified, a narrow opening in a steel box was never going to feel neutral. Mercy knew that immediately. The moment the rear gate lowered and the hollow interior opened toward her, she stopped. Her body went rigid from shoulders to tail. Her ears lifted slightly, then flattened back. She did not bolt, but the fear moved visibly through her, turning all that growing trust back into pure instinct. Her trunk shot toward Hannah and wrapped around her forearm with desperate strength. The gesture was not dramatic. It was pleading. Don't let this happen again. Hannah swallowed hard and stayed still. Caroline spoke from a respectful distance, keeping her voice low and even, reminding everyone else not to crowd the calf, not to rush, not to turn fear into pressure. Eli stood by the outer panel gate with his hat in his hands. Monica remained near the porch steps, with a folder of signed permits no one needed anymore but her. Even Mrs. Dorsey had come out before dawn, cardigan buttoned wrong, one hand pressed against her chest like she was trying to hold herself together. The first attempt failed gently. Hannah walked the path toward the trailer with a bottle in one hand and Mercy beside her. The calf followed for several steps, trusting the movement because it belonged to Hannah. But when the loading ramp changed under her feet and the dark opening swallowed the light ahead, Mercy balked hard. She pulled back, gave a rough, frightened cry, and nearly knocked the bottle from Hannah's hand. Mateo stepped back at once. No one blamed her. The fear was older than this moment. So Hannah changed the plan. She asked for 1 minute alone with Mercy at the bottom of the ramp. Caroline nodded. Hannah set the bottle aside, turned to face the calf fully, and placed both hands on the sides of her face. Mercy was breathing fast now, hot air rushing over Hannah's wrists. Hannah used the new language they had built over the last 2 days. The double tap on the trunk, the pause, the touch beneath the tournier. Then she began the low 3-note hum Mercy had learned meant stillness, safety, and stay with me. Something in the calf eased. Not all the way. Not enough to make this simple. But enough. Mercy's trunk loosened from Hannah's arm and slid instead across her palm. Hannah turned and stepped onto the ramp first, slowly, without looking back too often, trusting Mercy to decide whether to follow. For one long second, nothing happened. The whole yard seemed to hold its breath. Then came the soft scrape of one foot, then another. Mercy stepped onto the ramp, trembling but committed, fear and trust moving side by side inside the same small body. Once inside, she stopped again, but this time she did not try to retreat. The enclosed space made her eyes go wide, and she let out one low, uncertain rumble that sounded heartbreakingly young. Hannah climbed up beside her and sat on the built-in bench near the wall. After a moment's hesitation, Mercy shifted closer until her head rested awkwardly against Hannah's lap, not because she was comfortable, but because she remembered this posture from the worst hours and believed it might still save her. Hannah bent over her at once, one hand on the torn ear, one on the warm curve of her neck. Outside, people moved more quietly now. Eli secured the outer latches with slow, steady hands. Monica spoke softly with Caroline about route clearance and sheriff coordination. Rosa arrived just in time to hand Hannah a small cooler through the side access door and then stepped back, wiping at her eyes with the heel of her hand. Nobody made a speech. Nobody tried to turn the moment into something tidy. There are some departures that do not improve with words, only witnesses. When the trailer finally pulled forward, the house seemed to recede too quickly. Mercy felt it before she understood it. Her body tensed with the first roll of motion, trunk lifting, searching, testing the air for the yard that had become her entire map of safety. Hannah kept humming. Every few minutes, she repeated the same touch signal beneath Mercy's ear, and each time the calf settled a little faster. Through the small side vents, morning light slid in and out across her face in pale, moving stripes. The road out of San Angelo was longer than it had any right to be. At one rest stop on protected land outside town, Caroline approved a short pause so Mercy could drink and reset her balance. Mateo opened the side panel carefully, and Mercy stepped down only when Hannah did, staying so close her shoulder brushed Hannah's hip at every step. There were no crowds there, no cameras, no fences with neighbors behind them. Just open air, dry grass, and the low distant sound of wind moving across a wider piece of earth. That was when Hannah felt the first sharp split of what this journey really was. It was not simply taking Mercy somewhere safer. It was carrying her away from the only place she had learned to trust and toward a future that would ask her to trust other hands, other voices, other elephants. Everything good waiting ahead for Mercy depended on loosening what had formed between them in that backyard. Hannah knew that intellectually, but knowing a truth and surviving it are never the same task. She rested her forehead against Mercy's for one brief second before loading up again. By late afternoon, the Texas horizon had changed color and shape enough that even Mercy seemed to notice. She had grown quieter through the drive, less frantic now, more watchful, as if exhaustion and curiosity were beginning to share the same space. Each time the trailer slowed, she looked first to Hannah, then toward the light. By the time the federal rehabilitation gate appeared in the distance, the calf's ears had lifted slightly forward, not with confidence yet, but with something close to wonder. The facility sat wide and deliberate against the land, not pretty in the way people meant that word, but built for space, patience, and second chances. Beyond the intake pens and service roads were larger enclosures stretching into the dry, open distance, and from somewhere farther off came a sound Hannah had never heard in person before: multiple young elephants rumbling to one another across evening air. Mercy froze at the gate as if the earth itself had just spoken in her language. Caroline saw it happen and did not hide her relief. "She hears them," she said. Mercy lifted her trunk high, scenting the wind. The fear in her posture had not vanished, but it was no longer the only thing inside her. There was another pull now, older and deeper than the attachment to one human voice. Something ancestral, something calling her beyond the trailer, beyond the small miracle of a backyard rescue, into a life she had almost lost before it began. Hannah stood beside her, one hand still resting lightly on her shoulder, and understood that this was not the end. It was the first handoff to the future Mercy had been trying to reach all along. If Mercy's story touched your heart, drop a 1 in the comments. And if you believe Hannah did the right thing by loving her enough to let her go, comment hope below. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because there are more powerful, emotional stories like this coming next, and you won't want to miss the next one.